Well, hey guys, Jeff Danker here. Today I'm going to dive into the topic of deer sign, of how to read it, how to find it, and how to hunt it. And I hope you enjoy it. Well, when I think of deer sign, man, I think of people like Greg Miller and Roger Rother and the Wenzel brothers. It's books that I read way back in the day, and I just eat them up. And, you know, maybe that's you. Maybe that's you just remember finding your first rub or your scrape, or maybe it was back when you didn't even know what a scrape and rub were, the difference. And so as we go through this, I want to try to be very basic with you as well, so maybe someone doesn't know. You know, to me, there is, I guess you would call them wives' tales or whatever of deer sign. And so to me, again, maybe I'm wrong, but what I want to talk about is how I, Jeff Danker, interpret the sign, not how even Greg Miller did back in the day. So as I think through that, first of all, a rub and a scrape, if you don't know, if you're a young hunter or whatever, I mean, the rub is going to be on the cedar tree, or it's going to be on a oak tree, and it's going to be a rub, literally a rub from a deer, you know, strengthening his neck. He's building up his muscles for the year to be able to fight. He is actually using the rub at times for scent on the tree. And then a scrape is actually, you know, it's going to be a pawed out place in the ground where a deer, and we'll get into more of that as I talk, but it's going to be where they will urinate, and it's where they are communicating with that doe, the first does that come in heat to even the last does that come in heat, along with the licking branch where they're going to use their eye glands to leave scent. So again, we'll get into all that, but I just want to preface that right off the bat. But as a youngster learning how to read sign and how to hunt sign, I've made probably every mistake there was going through that, and I read and tried to learn so much, and I think Greg Miller and all them and all those books, but more than anything was feet on the ground and making those mistakes. And kind of where I would start with you is the best way to do this is, I want you to remember this, is to start next year, and you can really get a feel for this. It's like a February or a March, is take off through the property that you're hunting. I'm talking about walk through your property, and whether that's a 40-acre wood block or whatever it might be, but really observe the details. And the reason I tell you then, guys, is February, March is going to be, the deer sign is laid out on your property. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's everything. Everything that's happened is laid out. You know, all the rubs, all the scrapes, all the trails, bedrooms, I mean, where they've laid down. And this is the time of year, guys, that you can walk through those sanctuaries. Just walk them. If you kick that big buck up, great. And if you do, find that where he was laid there, you know, all the you know, from a deer using the bathroom and all that sign. And anyway, so diving into that. And the other thing I want to tell you, when you do walk that property, you know, most of us have these apps on our phones. Put on your tracking. And what I want you to do when you take off walking, just walk and let the terrain dictate. And all of a sudden, and as you diagonal through your properties, you will see the easy pathways. And most of the time, that's how a big buck will walk those as well. Whether you're coming up on a canyon and you have to walk this way. But if you will start to train your brain to say, oh, I just had to walk around this log. And then, you know, these are big time keys. And the big thing as a hunter, guys, to be able to hunt sign and terrain is going to be your access. So have that in your mind as you walk through, and even as you listen to this, is how do I get in this spot? Because a lot of times I'll look at a tree and I'm like, man, that would be so awesome to hunt this right here, a perfect tree. But then you got to think, well, how would I get to it? And so if you can't get to it without blowing the woods, it's not a very good place. So these are things to think through as you walk through that property. So now digging in. So, you know, I think as a kid, and as I learned to hunt, this is something that truly just, it got into my soul somehow. Is when I would see a rub or a scrape or a big track, and I'm just like, you're just dreaming, right? You got this image of this giant buck, maybe he's a drop tine, whatever. And I still have that today, guys. I love looking at, when I think of rubs, I think of these great big rubs that we'd find. And so there's all kinds of topics here that we get into, but I would tell you this, a big rub to me matters. A big rub usually is a big dominant deer. And not to say a little buck can't come rub that, but when I find those big rubs, I know that I'm probably dealing with something mature, and I just love that. Now, I would tell you, when you find those rubs, there's certain things you can look for is you can find those rub lines, and that will be a travel type pattern. But I'm just going to be honest, I don't put a lot of time into hunting rubs. It just tells me that there's a pretty good deer in here, I think. It's not something, I think a lot of times people would find them on the edge of a field, right? You find that all these rubs on the edge of the field, I'm gonna set up here. Not that you can't kill a deer there, but you gotta imagine what that is. I mean, dig into what a whitetail thinks. He's nocturnal for one, so he's at his destination field, and a lot of times those rubs are him coming off pre-dawn, and he's frustrated, and he starts making rubs before he has to go up to bed. He's a very disciplined animal, but he's going to get up. The older he gets, the more disciplined he is, and he's going to get back to his bedroom. So a lot of times if you're hunting these rubs, it's rubs that they're not going to be there in daylight a lot of times. Now, I will tell you, one of my best tactics to kill a good deer is the scrape. I truly love a scrape. A scrape is what you got to start thinking through. This is finding those scrapes, and a lot of times they'll be even opening. I see them open more and more early, even September and October. Deer, it's just their natural tendency, right? They're making scrapes, and but as season goes, and where these scrapes are, and again, kind of back to access, thinking, okay, I can come in this way with this wind, and hunt this scrape downwind. And I'm going to tell you one of the best tactics I know, if you can find those good scrapes, and then even back to history where you've had cameras where you've had daylight pictures on these scrapes, is you get in a tree and downwind from these scrapes, and preferably I like October 20th and up to that like November 5th. There's that window right there that's unreal. These frustrated bucks, and especially along with maybe a rain, these scrapes, they want them open. They as soon as that rain, I can promise you, I believe these deer are laying there when moisture happens, and they're like, we got to go freshen that. They don't want to miss Sally or whoever coming and miss that deal with their scent there. So I truly believe on a rainy day, if you can find those rainy days in October 20th through November 5th, even up to the 10th, and you get in there as it's raining, and as soon as it stops, a lot of bucks will come freshen those scrapes. So have in your mind to find that scrape line. Usually guys are going to be on the edge of the openings, right? And find that for rain or whatever, and get in there. And again, a scrape is something you can use with your trail cameras. I would just be very, very careful. A lot of people use, and I even create some of my own scrapes. So in other words, I might find a scrape over here, but the tree that I need to be in is over here 50 yards, and I can't get there and feel comfortable. A lot of times I will be careful and make another scrape and, doctor it up with tinks or whatever you want to use, but just be very careful with your footprints. Be very careful even with your hands. Maybe have gloves on. I use a stick. Very careful in that. And then use that tree that you found. So these are some tactics that I've used many, many times, and a lot of times he'll come from that scrape and he'll find this other one, and then he'll start being there. So it's something, but again, it's always going to go to your access, your wind. It's not a magic thing. I think we think of the deer that we hunt as maybe the most disciplined animal that I've ever hunted. And we have to be disciplined, or they will beat you every time. All of a sudden, if they get on to you on their scrape and you got too much scent there, they will abandon it. And not only them, the does and everything. So you got to be careful with that. So, and again, then just the other thing I want to talk a little bit about, I mean, we all love the rut. So two things in this as I think about sign, and even more just how to hunt topography or funnels. You know, if you don't know what a funnel is, it's more of a, something that creates a pinch point. Something, maybe it is that terrain that does that, and it'll make deer go a certain way. But I want to touch on getting in these trees, maybe where all this deer sign's way out here. And and a lot of times this happens to me, guys. I so want to be right here, if that makes sense. I want to be right here, but as I think through it, I'm like, man, if I go up there, I'm going to get busted from this angle. And so I might get off of that 100 yards in this tree that I can get to, and I feel like the wind will be better. And again, back to this frustrated buck, okay? Then I get in this tree, and this is pre-rut, but a frustrated buck that I can bring to me on my turf. So I want to paint a scenario for you, and I hope this helps you. So I want you to think of a big buck like this, or bucks in general, is every night they're going to be on a destination field. As soon as a big buck drops his velvet, whether that's September 1st, the 5th, whatever it is, as soon as he drops his velvet, as soon as he drops his velvet, he is ready to breed. He wants to breed, he's ready to breed, but what's the factor, right? The doe's not ready. So every day, frustration. And then I want you to think of this buck as, has he been grunting all year? He's been grunting all year. The does grunt, that's their communication. And now what happens with this buck is these other bucks that run with him, they start sparring. And this is something that I'm fixing to tell you, maybe you heard, maybe you haven't, maybe you're going to disagree with me, but I truly believe with all my heart, is these bucks, they fight in September. They don't just spar, they do spar, but what they do is they establish a pecking order. And I want you to think through this with me is, how else would it work? So let's just now fast forward to November, and you've seen all these bucks after a doe. Well, let's just say this big deer's after a doe, and every time he runs into another buck, he's got to whip that buck. Well, how's he ever going to breed that doe? But what happens, guys, is in September, the pecking order is formed. I've seen some of the biggest, baddest fights in September, but all of a sudden, the area is known who is the boss. That way in November, when they run into each other, oh, there's Biff, I already whipped him, and they know. Now, your argument might be, and I've had this happen to me, people say, well, Jeff, what about those deer in November that we always see on Facebook that they're cutting with a chainsaw, because they got in this fight? Well, usually what that is, guys, is that's where the buck that had the pecking order over here and the buck that had the pecking order way over here, all of a sudden, usually if you look at those dates when that happens, it's more into the rut, maybe usually even into your second doe, and it's where a line gets crossed. And it's this bad boy and this bad boy, and that's usually what you're seeing there. But I want you to remember this pecking order is established, and the biggest reason I'm telling you this is a tactic for hunting I believe so many miss is they don't carry a rattle bag, any set of horns that they can rattle with. They don't even bring their grunt or bleat early season. And I want you to know, kind of back to our scenario that we've painted, you're 100 yards off of where all this deer sign is now, but you're keeping a good wind. You're rolling up into October 23rd, 24th, whatever that pre-rut is. And then all of a sudden now you can go in and you can call, maybe you're blind calling in the morning, hitting the rattle bag, grunting and this and that, and all of a sudden you can pull from that area and get those bucks at the bottom of your tree. And I would even tell you, I've called in deer in September, in North Dakota, not just with a grunt. I'm talking about with a rattling them in. I'm talking about snort wheezing them in, the most aggressive call there is, because that's how they communicate. Just don't ever forget that. And And again, this is a tactic that I use a lot. It's not, I do get real aggressive to those spots, and I want to tell you that, of those spots that you see all that sign, be aggressive when it's time, but know when it's time. And when I say time, that's when the rut is happening. That is when I would tell you, do anything you want on your property. I'm talking about when it's the rut and you're out and you're seeing, oh, I just was going in this morning and I saw this buck chasing doe. It's been crazy. Do anything you want. I'm talking go to the heart of your place. I don't even care if you play the wrong winds at that time. Get in there when it's happening. Now, I want to be careful with that. Try to play the wind, but be aggressive that time of year. That's the kind of hunter I am. But the other sorts of the time, I am the most careful hunter there is. And so now, going to that subject of doing anything you want, it's really about this. If you want to beat the person over here that's only hunting a few hours in the rut or whatever, that's exactly what you're doing. It's just time in the woods. Time in the woods in a pinch point, time in the woods where there's a lot of sign, time in the woods where you got that right wind, because you never know what time of day that big buck's going to walk by there or run by there or whatever. So putting in that time in the rut. And I know we're kind of all over the place with this topic, but it is topography. It's still getting in and out of that tree stand. And one thing I would tell you on your access in and out, when you set all day, if you've not ever done that, if you want to try that this year in the rut, it's such a great thing, because one thing is you're limiting your spooking deer, right? You're walking in the morning, and then you're only walking out at night, whether instead of going in and out and then coming back after lunch and in and out. So there's a lot of that goes on. And then again, just your scrapes, your rubs, deer sign. I would even take it a step further, guys, and rewinding back to driving dirt roads in the early season, during season. Even at times taking a night off and saying, you know what, we have to cover some ground. We got to find out what's going on, because almost one of the number one mistakes that I've made is it kind of came from my grandpa, right? I mean, it's, well, you sit there long enough, he'll come by there. And I mean, there's some truth to that. But I just started, when I got the rut, listen, I ain't going to sit there long. If I ain't seeing a lot of deer, and I ain't seeing the action, I think it's time to move, because that's what's happening is you got to, at times, go find that hot doe, because that's where the action is. And I truly believe another tactic as we hunt that time of year is, speed scout. I mean, okay, it's 9:30 in the morning, and your uncle said never get down at that time, but if it ain't happening, you got that gut feeling, move. And especially if you're looking, you're like, man, I'm seeing glimpses all up in that timber way over there 200 yards. Dude, move. And if you run into a deer and all of a sudden you see a doe, just take off running after her and make her get out of there, because the woods is so acceptable to that time of year. And then just get in another tree as quick as you can, and because these deer at that time of year, they forget so quick. And this is the only time that I'll talk like that. And then again, it's all about the topography. It's about the sign that you've learned throughout the year, but you're just knowing that there's that big rub and there's probably a good deer here. We're in this pinch point where you've seen this big trail or it's pushing deer or whatever. So again, all over the place with this topic, but the sign, if it doesn't get you going early, there's just something in my heart when I see those rubs. There's something in my heart when I see this big old scrape that, I remember as a kid and someone telling me, man, there's a scrape in there the size of a car hood. I don't know why everybody always used that analogy, but I was just like, oh my gosh. And so be excited. Be excited about the deer sign. God has put these magnificent animals on your properties, on this earth, and they have this way to communicate with each other that is just unreal, of putting that scent on the ground, of communicating with their sounds. The way they're going to travel through the woods is not rocket science. It's back to that whole deal I told you, to walk through your property, and usually that's how a big buck will walk through your property. And so just remember that, and then not forgetting it, journaling it. knowing each and every year. And again, it's coming right now. I'm sitting here today and it's July, and it's that time where the sign is fixing to be laid down. We're in velvet, but there's still sign out there. There's still where I can drive down the road and see where there's trails that are crossing out of this wood block into this alfalfa field or whatever. And that's what I'm talking about. It's a full-time, big buck work, full-time, 24/7 of finding this different sign to help us be big deer hunters, whatever caliber you want to be. Just something that we all love, and something that I just enjoy so much of taking that deer sign in. So again, all over the place with this topic. I hope this helps you, and I hope you bag that trophy of a lifetime this year.